For the spring 2018 semester, I took the course Measurement and Evaluation in Education, also abbreviated as EDF 4430, and today I'm trying to present my final project. In my final project, I had to create an examination over a course of guidelines on things that we learned throughout the semester. And being that I'm a history major, I wanted to make a field of an examination in history. So I chose to do the AP US History first semester final as my example of a final exam. Now, I'm not here to detail my whole project, but I just wanted to kind of go through some of the steps I went through and some of the difficulties I had during the project. So first of all, one of the main difficulties I had in this project was coming up with specific learning objectives for a cumulative exam. My main struggle with this is because I couldn't just point to this as a test on a specific section of material. It was on four sections of material: pre-colonialism, colonialism, the war for independence, and then the Civil War years of United States history. So when kind of developing these problems, I had to query various AP sources from the College Board and look at some AP examinations and statistics to figure out what my learning objectives should be. So for one of them, I figured out that the Civil War era of the United States is a heavily questioned era on the AP final exam. So I made that portion 40% of my semester exam, and decided that one of my learning objectives was to make sure that students really understood the Civil War era questions I had on the examination. Now, part of the reasoning behind this is that I wanted to model this exam after the actual AP final exam to give the students an example of what they're going to be facing later on in the semester. Because all in all, the goal of this course is that the students obtain at least a 3 on this final. So in doing this, I heavily weighted this exam towards questions on Civil War era. So I gave them a quarter of the multiple choice questions on the Civil War era, and then one document-based question, which is an essay question for the Civil War era. And this is only one of my several learning objectives, but this is the process I use, is kind of figure out what I want to test on this exam and then confirm this with the College Board. And ultimately, my most important learning objective was to teach the students how to review this test, because I want to grade this test and then go over it with the students so they can figure out the portions that they struggled in and what they excelled at, so that they can kind of correct these errors before the final exam in May. So I elected to make my most important learning objective the idea of review. So a couple days after the examination, which would take place on Scantron for the multiple choice section, I would go through the test and answers with them and kind of look at percentages of questions that were missed, and we can review those areas in class, and then students can ask me specific questions. Ultimately, while this is a graded exam, I decided to make it pass or fail, because to me the most important part is giving students an example of what the final examination is going to be like, while still testing their knowledge of what they learned in the first semester. So going past the learning objectives, the next biggest problem I faced was actually creating questions for the exam, because this is going to be AP questions. The AP questions are questions that the students had never faced before in their college careers. They ask you to think like a historian, not to recall basic facts or different dates in a timeline. So I once again had to consult the College Board and look at some of the questions that they created in the past. Now, since this is the first exam of the student's nature, I wanted to leave a couple recall questions in there, such as, here's a date, what happened on this date, or what major war happened. But the majority of my questions, the students will receive a short passage or an image or some statistics, and they will have to answer a series of questions based on these. So these questions force the students to understand the timeline and the context of this timeline. So it's a lot more in-depth analytics than students are used to for history examinations. So I kind of weighted my exam to 70% of these analytical questions, whereas 30% are on recall, because I don't want to just have all of my students fail because this is going to be one of the first times they experience this type of question. So part of my review process will also be going through these sorts of questions and helping my students break down the passage, then have them tell me what happened in this era and what's important in this era, and then using that information to try and select the right answer on questions they commonly got wrong. And moving past these struggles, I kind of would like to detail the things that I consulted to get past this, and one I heavily mentioned was the College Board. The College Board website is great and intuitive. It breaks down the different subjects they do in classes and even gives you a manual of what should be taught for the classes. So I visited the College Board, looked at the AP US History examination, and tried to model my semester final after their actual examination. So in doing this, I created a test as similar as I could while still giving the students the best opportunity that I thought they had to pass the test. I also commonly consulted my textbook for this course in order to kind of get more details about things and try and understand the different aspects of test making I hadn't thought before. One of these aspects was reliability. So I elected to do the split half method, which I thought worked very well for this test, because one of the major problems with an examination like this that's very difficult is student cheating. So what I'm going to do is create an A and B form of the test, and that way students will not be able to copy answers, and I can still evaluate which answers are most commonly missed. I just have to keep in mind which part of the test is done. And to make this easy for the students to understand and cooperate with, there's just a little section of their Scantron to fill out that says whether they have test code A or test code B. And for me, this is a very easy workaround for cheating, as well as a great way to make sure that my test and the results of my test are reliable. Another kind of section that I had to consult with this was the idea of validity, as validity was a concept that I struggled with. And for me, the textbook helped a lot, as long as with the examples that my teacher and professor provided in class PowerPoints. And essentially I had to go through and make sure that different aspects of my test had to kind of be changed to make sure that it was quote-unquote viable in this respect. And kind of a point of emphasis for my entire examination is the idea of review. Like, ultimately, I want my students to pass this test, and the grading system is modeled after the AP grading system of you pass if you get a 3 or higher, which is 3 to 5, and to earn a 3 on this test, you have to get at least 45% of the questions correct. So for me, the most important aspect of this test is reviewing it with my students. So that will be a large portion of class time after the test to go over with the students, and creating these tools with them and giving them these tools to constantly check their work, make sure that they understand their work, understand their answer, so that ultimately when they're having struggles later on in the semester, they can use these tools that we already created to answer their questions or their shortcomings later on and help them learn the material better. So while this test is a semester test and I'm grading it on a pass or fail basis, the biggest takeaway I want my students to have is to be able to review the test and review it in a manner that isn't just, oh, I got this great, I'm doing fine. No, it's, oh, I got a 3 on this test. This is what I can do better, and let me go back and look at these questions and look where the sources and the answers come from and learn this material again, so that when I get to the final test, I can do this. And when they struggle on another test or quiz or examination in my course or an essay, they can go back and say, hey, this is the section of the material, this is what I need to fix up on, and this is the idea of analysis I need to also work on to try and fit the things that I'm learning into the context of the questions that I will be facing later on in the final examination given by the College Board. So while the ultimate goal of a test for any student is receiving a grade, for me it was for the students to understand how they can make themselves better at learning the material and what aspects of material they need to go back and relearn so that they can do fine on the AP examination. And ultimately, this is what my project culminated into, and this was my idea of emphasis in creating this AP US History first semester final. I thank you for your time and for allowing me the chance to present on my project. Have a great rest of the day.